Strengths-based leadership is a trendy topic today. Is focusing on our strengths, those skills that are already well developed, really a good approach? Even though there are some potential dangers associated with strengths-based leadership, I believe that there are 4 reasons why we should include this approach in our leadership. Reason number 1, you will be more engaged in your work. Think about one of your weaknesses that you bring into the workplace. How does it feel when you use that weakness repeatedly to accomplish something? Now think about one of your work-related strengths. How does it feel when you get to use that strength in your work? Most people tend to feel discouraged, inadequate, and unmotivated when they serve in areas of weakness. However, the opposite is usually true when we get to use our strengths. We feel empowered, excited, and fulfilled. According to a 2007 Gallup poll, people who do have the opportunity to focus on their strengths every day are 6 times as likely to be engaged in their jobs and more than 3 times as likely to report having an excellent quality of life in general. The Gallup research clearly indicates that we'll be more excited about our work when we get to use our strengths. The paid staff and volunteers on our teams will be more motivated to serve when we help them use their strengths in meaningful ways. In fact, Rath and Conchi discovered that when organizational leaders focus on people's strengths, there's a 73% chance that they'll be engaged in their work, compared to 9% when leaders do not focus on other strengths. When we're engaged in our ministry, we're much more willing to make significant investments in that ministry. Our enthusiasm level is higher, which spreads to others. We're more likely to persevere with a project and stick with a ministry long term. Andy Stanley has said, "Don't strive to be a well-rounded leader. Instead, discover your zone and stay there. Then delegate everything else." In other words, focus on your strengths. The second reason for emphasizing strengths-based leadership is that God wants us to wisely invest what He gives us. The parable of the talents in Matthew 25:14-30 teaches us to be wise stewards of what God entrusts to us. I believe that this includes our strengths and abilities. God has gifted us for a purpose, and it makes sense that we would use what He has given to us to accomplish His plans for our lives and the teams on which we serve. Of course, we also know that God uses us in our weakness. In fact, as we see in 2 Corinthians 12:9, His strength is made evident in our weaknesses. God, in His wisdom, will sometimes call us to serve in an area where we are humanly weak. Yet even as we use our strengths for God, we must do so in humility and in utter dependence on Him. In fact, we're always weak compared to Him and the power that He wants to pour in and through our lives. The third reason is that our strengths may indicate where God wants us to serve. If we believe that God gifts us for specific purposes, then it follows that those talents and abilities may indicate where God wants us to serve, at least in a general way. I still remember my 2nd grade teacher asking me to teach the rest of the class how to tell time. I learned that day and through subsequent speaking opportunities that I had some skill in public communication. Knowing that I had this ability helped me to discern God's calling into pastoral ministry and later on into a teaching and training role. Another reason to embrace strengths-based leadership is that it's often the best use of our time and energy. Some people, like Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers, would suggest that we can become world-class in any field with enough practice. Even if this was true, why would we want to invest 10,000 plus hours to turn a weakness into a strength when we could use that same amount of time to actually use our existing strengths to serve others and to develop those strengths even more in the process? Think about staff evaluations. Often we'll note both strengths and weaknesses, but then we'll ask staff members to devote significant amounts of time and energy to build up the weaker areas of their ministry. Of course, leaders often need a certain amount of skill in many different areas. Yet there's a difference between asking someone to shore up a weakness and requesting or requiring them to turn a weakness into a strength. In my view, it's much more productive for the person and the larger ministry if they shore up weaker areas to an acceptable level and/or add team members who are stronger in those areas while continuing to spend most of their time exercising strengths. Now, I recognize that sometimes we do need to build up areas of weakness in our lives to accomplish God's purposes. It's also possible that leaders, especially younger leaders, may have undeveloped strengths that would grow exponentially with some practice. I also realize that we may be in a work situation where we do not have the luxury of using our strengths consistently. However, it's still important that we look for opportunities to utilize the talents God has given us. John Maxwell encourages leaders to spend 80% of their time working on their strengths. In his words, growing in a weak area might bring you up to average in that area, but growth in a strength area has the potential to make you exceptional.